Good morning, everyone. All right, today is Thursday, April 23rd, and today I want to go over page 17 in your packets. This is called First-Hand Descriptions of the Black Plague. There's no review questions or anything to submit today, other than watching this screencast and filling out page 17 along with me. Just as a reminder, though, yesterday you had to submit review and check-in questions on Google Form. And the only other one that will be coming up in the near future is going to be posted tomorrow. That will cover some questions about the Black Plague, but it is not due until Monday. Just to give you guys some more time and some more space to cover all the pages, watch the screencast videos, and then make sure that you have done all that before you do your questions, which will be due on Monday. All right, so let's go over to our packet on page 17. Today we're going to be looking at some first-hand descriptions of the Black Plague and how it spread. First-hand descriptions would be eyewitness accounts, journals of people who lived back then who are experiencing these things. These are primary sources. So if we look at some of the dates on these documents, the first one from Michael Platensis is from 1357. The second one is from a later outbreak than the major one that we're looking at. This is from 1480, Edward IV's Plague Medicines. And the last one is Giovanni Boccaccio. This was put out on a website in 2001, but it is from a document in 1348. So these are all primary, first-hand accounts of the Black Plague and its spread. And I want to take 1 second just to correct one thing that I was saying yesterday in the screencast video on the introduction to the Black Plague. My wife, who's a pharmacist and kind of our household medical expert, caught me on one thing. I referred to the Black Plague as the plague virus many times in the screencast video yesterday, and to be medically correct, that is not the case. The coronavirus that we're experiencing today, COVID-19, is in fact a virus. It's not necessarily a living organism like a disease that's caused by bacteria, which is what the plague was. So if you have a need for a little bit better answer than that, what I would recommend you guys do, which would be awesome and really impress your living environment teachers, is send them a question, send them an email or ask them on Classroom. Say, hey, living environment teacher, in Mr. Freeman's social studies class, we're learning about the Black Plague, and we're comparing it to COVID-19, the coronavirus, but we understand that the Black Plague was not necessarily a virus. Ask them, what is the difference technically between a virus and a bacteria? They'll like to answer questions like that. They'll like to see that you're having an inquisitive mind, and that will be something really cool you can do to reach out and connect with them. All right, so before we go over page 17, I do want to point out that there is a link I posted on this Google Classroom post, the screencast you're watching today, that brings you to the article that I used yesterday, which has 3 different video clips in it. We're going to be watching another short one in just a few moments, but I posted that article because that gives you a very good rundown from start to finish about the basics of the Black Plague, how it spread, its impact, and how people experienced it. So it'll give you more information beyond just what I have here on page 17. And then tomorrow, of course, we'll get into more about the effects. But if you want to read a little bit more and do some research, you can read that article. There's also a lot of links to other articles and other video clips that History Channel website has for you to look at. So explore that if you want some more information. All right, so let's start on the top of page 17. Let's read our directions. We're going to read through these passages below together and answer the questions on the right-hand side. Now, I'll give you a little heads up. I did highlight some points along the text that I want you to also highlight. And those will be things that I explain or that we could maybe use in our answers. Now, let's preview the first 2 questions. I'll give you a little clue. The first 2 questions are going to come from our first document from Michael Platensis. So let's read through, and we're looking for answers to this question. According to Platensis, how did the plague reach Italy? And the second question, what happened once an individual was exposed to the plague? All right, so let's start reading right at the top here. At the beginning of October, in the year of the incarnation of the Son of God, 1347, 12 Genoese galleys, which are trading ships, entered the harbor of Messina. If you look on our map over here, Messina was a major trading port, kind of at the end of the boot of the Italian peninsula, almost right next to the coast of Sicily. In their bones, they bore so virulent a disease that anyone who only spoke to them was seized by a mortal illness and in no manner could evade death. The infection spread to everyone who had any contact with the diseased. Those infected felt themselves penetrated by a pain throughout their whole bodies, and so to say, undermined. Then there developed on the thighs or upper arms a boil about the size of a lentil, which the people called burn boil. This is basically what Michael Platensis is describing as the Buboes, which is kind of where the term the bubonic plague comes from. You would have these buboes, these welts, which would sometimes ooze pus and be very, very painful. They would develop on your arms. And what made them even more painful is often you would have them develop on like your inner thighs, up in your groin area, sometimes in like your armpits, very uncomfortable places to have an injury or a welt like that. So these burn boils, this infected the whole body and penetrated it so that the patient violently vomited blood. This vomiting of blood continued without intermission for 3 days, there being no means of healing it, and then the patient expired. So questions 1 and 2, we can answer from this first document. But to go along with this, how it spreads and a little bit of how people experience the symptoms, I also want to show you this video clip together, which will give us a little bit better information to make our answer that much more thorough. So we're going to watch a few minutes of this called How the Black Death Spread So Widely.
At the end of the Mongol trade routes lies the port city of Kaffa on the Black Sea, starting point for merchant ships en route to Italy. In 1347, the Mongols attacked the Christian city of Kaffa, hoping to take this vital trade link for themselves. But in the heat of hostilities, the Mongols suddenly confront a virulent new enemy, plague. It inspires them to launch a final desperate plan.
The Mongols got the plague and had to call off the siege. But before they left, they decided to catapult their dead corpses, the dead bodies of their victims, into the town in order to, quote, extinguish everyone inside and give the plague to their enemies. And apparently this is how the plague was communicated by the Mongols to Europeans.
While the story might be more legend than fact, the Mongol pestilence spreads to the townspeople of Kaffa. Many historians believe it hitches a ride on merchant boats bound for Europe, and its first port of call is the island of Sicily.
So let's take a second to stop right there. So far, the story you've probably heard in the past and what we've seen in the videos and discussed up to now was that rats carrying fleas, they hitched rides on ships, and that is how the Black Plague reached Europe. And although that is true, there's also another part of the story, another part of transmission of how this plague spread. And it has to do with these very clever, very ruthless Mongolians. So in that video clip just a second ago, they showed how the Mongolians were invading cities in Eastern Europe over by the Black Sea, and a lot of their soldiers were dying of this same plague that was slowly spreading out of Asia into the Middle East. It eventually even gets to Africa, although we're only really focusing on its impact to Europe. And the Mongolians are seeing their soldiers die. The plague is running its way through their ranks so much that they're actually having to call off their attacks, their sieges. But before they retreat, before they give up on taking over the town, they decide to leave behind one last little weapon. It actually turns out to be kind of a biological warfare weapon, whether they intentionally knew this or not. They were throwing infected and dead soldiers that had the plague over the walls of the city, and therefore transferring the plague to people inside of those city walls. So this plague turns out to be not only spreading just by rats and fleas coming into Europe on ships, but also from these Mongolians. So the Mongolians we've mentioned a few times in prior units, and we're mentioning them now. We will spend a day or so next week just looking at a little bit more of who these Mongolians are. This would be a topic that would normally be in one of our regular units. I didn't put it in this unit just because it was a little bit too much, but it is an important culture and important people to look at. So we'll spend one little mini lesson day on that next week. All right, let's see a little bit more about how the plague affects Italy and Europe.
And in the towns, ships from the Black Sea sail into harbor, bearing something foul. Below decks, the Italians find a cargo of corpses. The few survivors are reported to have sickness clinging to their very bones. When the townspeople realize the danger, they try to banish the plague ships from their harbor, but it is too late. The plague has already taken hold, and the dying begins.
Initially, it would have been difficult to tell the early symptoms of Black Death from a very heavy flu-like, what we would consider to be flu-like symptoms, fevers, chills, and high temperature. And then there would be a second stage where the development of the welts, the swelling of the buboes.
It's a spread. Be very, very rapid. It can cause septic shock. Your blood pressure will drop very rapidly. See multi-organ failure. The vascular system can become leaky, and you can have hemorrhaging. The buboes themselves are very, very painful. It's a very awful way to die.
As the plague rages through the Sicilian town of Messina, the survivors have only one place to turn: the Holy Mother of God. Those still able to walk trek to her shrine 6 miles away and carry her back to the city. Though the Sicilians shun their Messinese neighbors, they cannot outrun the disease. The Mongol sickness leaps across the island with startling speed, and the horror has just begun. Already other Genoese ships from Kaffa are landing on the Italian mainland. They bear furs, textiles, and rats, all fine purveyors of death. Like an avenging angel, the plague will sweep across an unsuspecting continent as the apocalypse begins.
Okay, so that gives you kind of a gruesome illustration of how this plague affects people's bodies, but it also gives us more of a bigger picture on how the plague spread into Europe. So let's go back to our questions. So now that we've read a little bit of Michael Potensis's 1357 document, and we've looked at some illustrations in the video, we can answer our first 2 questions on page 17. So I'm going to hop over to our slides so you can fill these in with me. All right, first question was, according to Platensis, how did the plague reach Italy? It arrived on trade ships. Rats and fleas on the ship infected the sailors, and then it spread through human contact after that. But a bigger part of this picture is we also know that the Mongolians were, in part, responsible for spreading it into the Black Sea before it hopped on some of those trade ships down into the Mediterranean. The second question, what happened once an individual was exposed to the plague? So I want you to lay out kind of the 4 steps of what would happen to the person before they die. First, pain throughout the body. Second, they would develop these buboes, these burn boils on the skin. Third, as the plague would be in your lungs, as the video yesterday showed us, it would kind of liquefy your lungs and you would end up bleeding inside and eventually vomiting up blood for 3 days as your lungs kind of fell apart and deteriorated. And after those 3 days, step 4, you would be dead. So not a very nice way to go. Let's go back to our document so we can look at questions 3 and 4. Let's preview our questions before we read the next couple of documents. Question 3, do you think the cure described over here in Edward IV's plague medicines would actually work? Why or why not? So let's do that one together right now. A medicine for the plague. Take an egg that is newly laid and make a hole in either end, and blow out all that is within, and lay it to the fire, and let it roast till it may be ground to powder, but do not burn it. Then take a quantity of good treacle, and if you don't know what treacle is kind of a dark syrup, similar to molasses that you would use like in baking and maybe on pancakes and things. And mix the treacle in with chives and good ale. Then make the sick drink it for 3 evenings and 3 mornings. So to answer this question, this is up to you. This is your opinion. Because do you think that this type of cure would actually work? Why or why not? So this is your call. But consider, does it have anything in it that we would consider medicinal today? Think of what we know also today about how the plague actually spread back then. This, amongst many other types of remedies that people tried to come up with back then, did not really have a lot of factual root and reason in medical knowledge, because back then they didn't have a lot of accurate medical knowledge like we do today. So answer that question, considering that perspective. One other thing I want to point out too is back on our page a few days ago, there was a picture of a plague doctor. So let's scroll back up. I'll just give you a little bit of insight into some other remedies and things that people were doing to try to get rid of and prevent the plague from their bodies. So this picture of the plague doctor, the reason why they have this mask that looks kind of like a big long bird's beak is the plague doctors, along with other people, thought for a while that you could actually contract the plague through the smell, which was really awful when you're around the infected people. So what a lot of people would do would put herbs and flowers and potpourris either in their pockets so that you could, that the smell would go up in front of your nose and sort of block the plague from coming into your nose. That was the belief anyways. And inside of these long beaks of the plague doctor would be stuffed, full of those same potpourris, those same mixtures of herbs and flowers. Kind of like a really old, way of creating like a gas mask, but just using herbs and flowers. And in fact, the nursery rhyme, the ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. Posies was a type of potpourri. That whole entire nursery rhyme actually comes from, the story of people dealing with the plague. Yeah, so these remedies varied from all kinds of crazy stuff, from this, egg, treacle, chive and ale mix, to burning potpourris, to simply ringing church bells to try to get evil spirits from carrying the plague into their city. The list goes on and on. That's why I wanted to give you that article to check out, to read some of the links, and even do a little research on your own if you're interested in some of the other, bizarre but very interesting and crazy ways that they tried to get rid of the plague. All right, and let's take care of our last question. Almost there, guys. Number 4 is, what happened among families once one of the family members fell sick with the plague? Video clip actually gave us a little insight into this, but we have one primary source account from Giovanni Boccaccio. One citizen avoided another. Hardly any neighbor troubled about others. Relatives never or hardly ever visited each other. Moreover, such terror was struck into the hearts of men and women by this calamity, that brother abandoned brother, and the uncle his nephew, and the sister her brother, and very often the wife her husband. What is even worse and nearly incredible is that fathers and mothers refused to see and tend their children, as if they had not even been their children. So to answer number 4, what happened among families once one of the members fell sick with the plague? The video showed us that once you were tending somebody who was sick and they were sweating with fever and they started to have these buboes on their skin, by the time this was making its way through most of Europe, everybody had realized that once that infected person got to that stage, they were pretty much only a few days away from dying. And the more that they realized how quickly you could catch this from being around people, they knew that if you were tending somebody like that in the same room, chances were almost 100% that you were likely to catch it and you would be dead too. So what do people do? What do families do? They would avoid each other completely. They didn't even want to get in the vicinity of someone else. They would even abandon each other. Family members abandoning one another, including parents not even tending to their own children. So think about that in comparison to our quarantines and our social distancing. This is a much more hardcore, extreme version of what they're doing for social distancing back then, because they were so afraid, so ignorant, so unknown about the real knowledge of how this was spreading, that they didn't want to get anywhere near anybody who had it. One other thing I want you to take a look at, if you're interested in learning a little bit more, is there's a third video clip in the article that we're using, that I've been showing you, that also shows a little bit about the mass graves and the type of people that would volunteer to take the dead bodies, put them in these large mass graves, which according to this would definitely be a huge risk of contracting the Black Plague. So why would people actually want to be around these bodies if they knew that there was a very good chance that they could catch it? Check out that video clip. That actually gives us a little introduction into some of the economic effects that we're going to look at tomorrow, about how laborers are experiencing the Black Plague and the economic benefit that actually ends up coming up into their lives for the lower class peasants in the long run. There's actually a little bit of a happy story to the end of this whole Black Plague mess. All right, folks, so this is the end of the screencast for today. Check out that article if you want to read any more information. And tomorrow we will go over the rest of the pages in our packet, the effects of the Black Plague. And I will post some review questions on a Google form tomorrow, but those will not be due till the end of Monday, just to give you some time to catch up on everything and make sure that you are ready to go for those questions. So email me with any questions that you have about today's topic, and stay happy, stay healthy, get outside, enjoy some sunshine if you can, and I will see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.